The galaxy is not only a graveyard of empires, it is a breeding ground for hungers that no sane mind can comprehend. Among the darkest of these hungers is the infection carried not by plague, but by whispered promises, by a touch, by a gaze that lingers too long in the shadows of a hive world. To be infected by a Genestealer is not to be conquered by blade or bolter, but to have your very blood reshaped, your soul rewritten, and your loyalties stolen long before you realize they are gone. It is a corruption that does not announce itself with banners or fleets, but with a father who prays to the emperor and secretly dreams of alien stars, with a mother who rocks her child to sleep and sees in its eyes a reflection that is not human. It begins quietly, but it always ends in fire. There are places in the Imperium where the air is thick with oil fumes, where the walls of the hive stretch upward in endless tiers of rusted steel and broken glass, and where the only light comes from failing lumen strips that buzz like tired insects. It is in these places that the Genestealer moves, not as a monster leaping from the dark, but as a shadow within the crowd. Few notice the shape at first: a bent worker carrying a sack of ore, a pilgrim with a hood drawn too low, a form glimpsed in the smoke between manufactorum levels. Yet when it chooses, it is always seen, not as predator, but as savior. The eyes that meet its gaze do not recoil in terror, though they should. They widen, caught between confusion and awe, as if the universe has opened a door they never knew existed. The first touch is rarely violent. That is the great cruelty of the Genestealer. To be infected is not to be struck down by claw or consumed by alien jaws, but to feel something like intimacy, something that feels like revelation. Its claw rests against skin, the kiss of saliva transferring a fragment of alien essence into human blood. It feels almost tender, a communion rather than an assault. Those who survive that first encounter rarely scream, they rarely resist. Instead, they find themselves trembling, breathless, unable to describe what has been done to them, but certain that they have been chosen. In a galaxy where life is nothing but labor and fear, where hope is rationed like water, to be chosen feels like a gift. What follows is not immediate horror. The victim does not collapse, does not convulse. They rise again, unmarked to any eye but their own, walking among their kin as though nothing has changed. Yet inside them something stirs. At first it is only in dreams. Flickers of alien stars, patterns of constellations never mapped by human cartographers, a voice without words whispering through the corridors of sleep. The infected wake drenched in sweat, unable to remember the dream fully, but carrying with them a sense of purpose they did not have before. They feel alive in a way they had forgotten they could feel, as though the endless drudgery of the hive has suddenly been given meaning. The emperor is still their god. Their lips still move in prayer before the flickering shrine lights. Their hands still trace the imperial aquila when they pass the sigil carved into a hab wall. Yet even in the act of faith, something else coils within them, something that makes the prayers sound hollow. The emperor feels distant, a golden statue sealed on terror, a god whose light is felt but not seen. But the touch they felt, that was real, that was immediate. And it is this contrast that eats at them, slowly, silently, until they cannot tell if their devotion is to him on terror, or to the alien hand that touched their flesh. They speak of it to no one, not at first. In the Imperium, secrets are a currency, and confessions are often a death sentence. So they hold it within, carrying the infection like a sacred ember. But already the ember is spreading heat. They find themselves looking at others differently. Co-workers bent over their machines, neighbors trudging through the endless stairways, overseers barking orders from raised platforms. Each of these, they begin to think, could be chosen too. Each of them could feel what I have felt. The infection does not simply rewrite their biology, it rewrites their longing. What they crave is no longer survival, it is communion. And so the infection begins its work, in silence, in secrecy, in blood. The change begins small, so subtle that the infected can almost convince themselves it is nothing. Their senses sharpen in ways they cannot explain. The taste of recycled water seems less metallic, the thrum of machinery more layered, as though each piston's beat carries its own rhythm. The hum of a power conduit resonates like a chord in the back of the skull. Even the stench of oil, sweat and smog takes on a strange, almost living complexity, as though the hive itself is breathing. At first it feels like a blessing, a kind of awakening in a world that has always seemed gray and dead, but as the days pass, the sensations deepen until they become overwhelming. Noise is no longer just noise, it is a song, Smells are no longer just foul odors. They are markers, signals, whispers of territory and presence. The victim realizes that they are no longer perceiving the hive as a human but as something more, something alien. And with these sharpened senses comes hunger. Not hunger for food. The ration bread and corpse starch sustain the body well enough. This hunger is different, more insidious. It is a craving for nearness, for contact, for others who share the touch. Alone, the infected feels incomplete, gnawed by an emptiness they cannot name. They linger longer in crowds, searching faces, listening to voices, hoping for a spark of recognition. They begin to notice others who linger too. At first only one or two, then dozens, then more. Men and women who look the same as everyone else, but whose eyes when they meet hold a flicker of something deeper, a silent acknowledgement, a knowing. It is through these silent exchanges that the web begins to form. The Genestealer need not return, not yet. Its work is already done. The infection is the seed, and the seed carries its own instructions. Soon the chosen will find each other, drawn by an instinct that feels like destiny. They will gather in dark corners of the hive, in forgotten maintenance tunnels and abandoned prayer cells, at first unsure, whispering half-truths and questions. But with every meeting, the whispers grow more confident. You have seen it too. You have felt it. You are not alone. The ember of infection bursts into flame, and with it comes a strange comfort. They are part of something larger now. To outsiders they remain unchanged. They go to work, they serve their shifts, they bow before the overseers, they pray to the emperor, but beneath the surface they are transforming. Their blood now carries the echo of the alien. Their dreams pulse with visions of a vast and terrible will reaching across the void. They imagine themselves not as slaves of a decaying empire, but as chosen heralds of a future that no one else can yet see. When the ecclesiarch's sermons thunder from broken vox grills, they nod and murmur their amens. Yet their hearts burn with a different scripture, one not spoken but felt, one that tells them salvation is not on terra, but in the stars beyond, where something vast and luminous waits. There are moments of fear, of course. Late at night, when sleep is shallow and the mind claws against itself, they wonder what exactly has been planted inside them. They recall the stories, the warnings carved into the Imperium's bones, Xeno's corruption, alien contagion, the certainty that heresy leads only to fire. They know what the Inquisition would do if it learned of this. They know what the Astra Militarum would do if they were discovered. The thought of a bolter's muzzle pressed to the skull or the hiss of a flamer's trigger haunts them. And yet, the fear is never enough. The infection's gift is stronger, stronger than duty, stronger than creed. So they go on, day after day, smiling when spoken to, bowing when ordered, dreaming when asleep, a secret world unfolding inside them, a world shared with others who now walk in shadow. And though they do not know it yet, every step they take, every word they whisper, every breath they draw is part of a greater pattern, a tapestry being woven by claws they will never see. They are no longer truly human. They are the beginning of a cult. Content with one soul, it seeps outward, quiet as breath, patient as stone. It begins in the home, in the places where trust is deepest, where walls are thin and secrets are unspoken. The infected reach for their families not with words, but with presence. They hold their children a little longer at night, rocking them while a strange warmth hums in their blood. They share meals with their kin, and in the simple act of passing food from hand to hand, the seed stirs, whispering of unity. To their partners they offer a gaze that glows with unsettling devotion, a tenderness that feels both comforting and suffocating. The bonds of family twist, and soon they are no longer merely husband, wife, daughter, or son. They are vessels, vessels for something vast. It is in these homes that the first physical changes begin to appear, so slight they are easily dismissed. A child's eyes catch the light at an odd angle, gleaming violet for a heartbeat before returning to brown. A newborn's grip is just a little too strong, the nails just a little too sharp. A mother's lullaby drifts into tones she swears she does not know, harmonies not of any imperial hymn. These are not aberrations, not yet, but they are omens, signs of a future written in alien blood. And though fear brushes the edges of their thoughts, the infection soothes them, wrapping them in the lie that this is all as it should be. That these changes are blessings, that they are chosen. Soon whispers become ritual. Families gather not only for supper but for secret vigils. In cramped rooms and damp basements, they light candles not to the emperor, but to something else, a shape they cannot describe but can feel. They do not dare sculpt it, do not dare give it a name, but in their minds it has already taken form. They bow their heads, pressing their foreheads to the rusted floor, whispering prayers of gratitude for the touch that binds them. To a passerby, it might seem no more than a family meal, a moment of closeness in a life of hardship, but to those within, it is holy communion. Neighbors begin to notice, of course. They see families that once kept to themselves now speaking in hushed groups, sharing food more freely, walking with heads lifted instead of bowed. Some grow suspicious, muttering that perhaps devotion to the emperor is slipping. Others are drawn in, hungry for the same warmth, the same strange light in the eyes of their neighbors, and so the infection spreads further, not through violence, not through coercion, but through longing. In a hive where every day is toil and dust and despair, this hidden warmth is irresistible. Those who feel it for the first time describe it like a fire in the chest, a sense that they belong not just to themselves, but to something greater than any Imperium could ever offer. Yet still the outer mask is maintained. In public they kneel before the Aquila, their voices steady in hymns of loyalty. They march to the manufactorums, they tithe their wages, they attend sermons, but behind closed doors the truth is spoken. The emperor is not their savior, but their captor. Terror is not the holy cradle, but the chains that bind them. Their salvation lies not in a golden throne but in the stars, in the endless unfathomable void where the true Father awaits. It is here, in these homes and hidden chambers, that the first generation of the cult truly begins. Children are born not entirely human, not entirely alien, their souls already tethered to the shadow in the warp. They do not know it yet, but they are the bridge, the promise that the infection will endure. And as these children grow, they will carry the secret not as burden but as inheritance, for they were never meant to be free, they were meant to serve. The Genestealer that set this in motion may be long gone, vanished into the underhive or struck down by chance. It does not matter. The seed has taken root, the cult is alive, and it will never stop growing. The infection cannot remain confined to a single household. Like smoke it slips beneath doors, like water it seeps through cracks filling every hollow space. Soon the whispers are not limited to kin but spread into the hive's underbelly, into the work crews who share meals in the manufactorum, into the gangs who rule the alleys of the sump, into the forgotten souls who cling to survival in the shadows. The first converts do not march openly, they move with care, planting the seed with a word, a glance, a shared ration that tastes sweeter when blessed by unseen hands. The cult does not need banners or sermons to grow. It grows in silence, in trust, in the small exchanges that make life bearable. In the manufactorums where the air is heavy with promethium fumes and the roar of machines drowns all thought, it begins with a simple gesture, a worker who slips a portion of his food to another, despite the punishment it risks. When asked why, he only smiles and says, "We are not alone anymore." Among the gangs of the underhive, it starts as an oath whispered in the dark, a vow stronger than blood. Rivalries cool, old grudges fade, and killers who once fought over scraps now share their blades in defense of something unseen. The infection smooths away division, weaving bonds where once there was only hatred. At first, it seems like a miracle. Crime falls, work gangs become more efficient. Families care for one another instead of tearing each other apart. The local enforcers, blind to what festers beneath the surface, even note improvements in productivity and morale. They write reports praising discipline, never realizing that what they witness is not loyalty to the Imperium, but devotion to something far older and hungrier. The cult wears the mask of order, but behind that mask its true face sharpens. Hidden shrines begin to appear, built from scraps of iron and stone tucked in corners where the eyes of the ecclesiarchy do not reach. At first they are little more than crude symbols scratched into walls, concentric circles that spiral into one another, or jagged star shapes that mean nothing to the uninitiated. But for those touched by the seed, these markings glow with meaning. They are not decoration, they are invitation, a call to kneel, to whisper, to bind oneself to the promise of salvation. The deeper one goes into the hive, the bolder the shrines become. In abandoned tunnels and rust-choked chambers, entire altars rise, crude effigies draped with tattered cloth, bones arranged in patterns that mimic alien geometry. Here the cult gathers in secret, hundreds of voices speaking as one. Their prayers are not screamed or sung, but murmured, a susurrus like the stirring of wind through a graveyard. To stand among them is to feel the weight of inevitability, As if every breath draws you closer to something immense and inescapable, rumors begin to spread. Of course, some whisper of a new sect forming in the hive, one that promises hope where the emperor has abandoned them. Others claim the dreams of the workers are changing, filling with visions of endless stars and claws reaching from the dark. A few priests of the ecclesiarchy grow suspicious, but their words are drowned out by the sheer apathy of those above them. After all, who would believe that such devotion could be turned from the emperor? The hive has always had its strange cults, its hidden superstitions. What is one more? And so the infection thrives. It is no longer a seed, it is a root system buried deep in the bones of the city, spreading in silence, ready to crack stone and topple empires. Those who are part of it walk with a secret smile, carrying in their hearts the knowledge that they are no longer alone. They belong to something vast, something eternal, something that will one day rise and sweep the galaxy clean. The first touch is no longer just memory. It is movement, it is breath, it is destiny unfolding, and though the Imperium does not yet see it, the end has already begun. The first children are born quietly. No trumpets herald their arrival, no records are written. They slip into the world as any other babe of the hive, wrapped in rags and swaddled against the cold, their cries lost beneath the endless grind of machinery. But to those who watch with knowing eyes, they are more than infants. They are the promise of a future carved in alien flesh. The parents weep, but not from fear. For them the strangeness is a blessing. Where others might recoil at the sight of a too large eye, a crooked limb, or fingers that curl with insectile precision, the chosen smile. They see perfection where others see deformity. The babe's very existence proves that their faith is not delusion. The star-born have touched them, and the bloodline of salvation has begun to flow. These firstborn hybrids are hidden from the wider hive. They are kept in shadowed basements, in sealed chambers beneath the manufactorums, in forgotten tunnels where no enforcer treads. They are raised in silence, rocked to sleep not by lullabies but by murmured prayers. Their childhood is a strange one. They do not play in streets or learn the catechisms of the ecclesiarchy. Instead, they are taught to listen to the whispers that fill their dreams, to trust the unseen warmth that thrums in their veins. Generations follow, each more refined than the last. The firstborn hybrids are grotesque, their forms unmistakably marked by the alien. Some have too many joints, their arms folding like the limbs of a mantis. Others grow crests of bone upon their skulls or eyes that shine with reflective light. Yet as each brood grows, the line blurs. By the second and third generations, the differences are subtle, a certain sharpness to the gaze, a grace of movement too fluid for baseline humanity, a sense of unity that makes them seem more like reflections of one another than individuals. And then, in time, the fourth generation comes. They are beautiful, perfect. They could walk among the unknowing masses without notice, their alien heritage hidden beneath skin and smile. Only in their eyes, deep and unblinking, does the truth linger. These are the infiltrators, the bridges between the hive and the cult, the knives hidden in plain sight. The Imperium would call them abominations, yet within the cult they are adored, honored as living proof that the star-born walk beside them. Their every word carries weight, their every step is followed, for they are not just children of the infection, they are the future, the vessels through which the hive itself will be remade. The hidden kin grow in silence, in shadows, in secrecy. They are the roots and branches of the infection, extending unseen through the hive's veins. To the outside world, they are nothing. To the cult, they are everything. The hive is a labyrinth of metal and ash, a place where countless millions toil unseen, and in such a place secrets thrive. For generations the hybrids had been hidden, nurtured in dark silence, but as they matured, they learned to step from the shadows, to blend themselves into the endless tide of humanity. No enforcer could see what they truly were. To the casual glance they were little more than laborers, faces lost in the endless procession of tired souls dragging themselves to the manufactorum shifts. But beneath that disguise lay precision. Every word, every gesture, every silence was a calculated mask, perfected through years of indoctrination. The cult taught them not only to endure but to mimic, to walk unseen among those who would call them mutant and burn them without trial. Soon their infiltration became a quiet art, A fourth-generation hybrid might rise to become an overseer of a workline, subtly adjusting quotas to weaken the hive's flow of promethium or munitions. Another might join the ranks of the underhive preachers, whispering sermons not of the emperor but of a greater salvation waiting beyond the stars. Some even donned the uniforms of enforcers, their loyalty no longer to the Imperium but to the Brood, ensuring that raids missed the cult's havens, that inspections overlooked strange gatherings in the night. The infection was not carried only in blood but in belief. Those who lived beside the hybrids could not help but notice something different about them, a calmness, a certainty, a sense of purpose that ordinary men and women could not claim. They seemed unafraid of death, tireless in labor, unwavering in loyalty to one another. For the broken and the desperate of the hive, that was irresistible. Soon more and more began to whisper the prayers of the Starborn, even if their blood was still untouched. The hybrids were no longer just children hidden away. They had become the sinew and bone of the hive itself. Each new role taken was another thread woven into a web that grew wider and stronger with every passing cycle. By the time the administratum scribes filed their reports, by the time the Arbites noticed the subtle slackening of imperial discipline, it was already too late. The Brood was not simply growing, it was becoming indistinguishable from the hive's beating heart. And yet behind the ordinary faces, behind the endless masks of humanity, the truth remained. Their dreams were filled with visions of the stars, their prayers whispered not to terror but to the vast void beyond. Every hybrid, no matter how human they appeared, carried the certainty that their kinship was not of this world, that they were building toward a moment when shadows would burn away, and the hive would awaken to its true master. The hidden kin were everywhere now, a quiet legion woven into the hive's bones. To most, they were invisible, but for those who could see, for those who dared look too closely, there was something profoundly unsettling in their eyes. Something that spoke of hunger and destiny and a patient love that would one day swallow the stars themselves. Every movement requires a center, and every faith requires a prophet. For the hybrids, that figure came not by election or decree, but through blood and instinct. The magus was never chosen. He was born of the Brood, a child whose mind opened not only to the whispers of his kin, but to the distant call that emanated from the void itself. His presence was more than charisma, more than cunning. He was the voice that gave words to the dreams that haunted their restless nights, the interpreter of visions too vast and terrible for lesser minds to endure. When he spoke, even the most hardened hybrid bowed in reverence. His sermons were not shouted from pulpits of gilded stone, but whispered in rust-choked tunnels and abandoned hab blocks. And yet they carried more weight than the endless proclamations of the administratum. Where the imperial creed demanded obedience to a distant and indifferent emperor, the magus promised love, family, and liberation. He painted a future where the weak would never again be broken by the strong, where the hive's endless cruelty would be remade into unity under the light of their true star-born kin. But above even the magus, unseen yet omnipresent, was the patriarch. To gaze upon him was to look upon revelation made flesh. His form was monstrous, a bloated echo of the xenos that had first seeded this infection into humanity's veins, yet those who stood before him did not recoil. They fell to their knees trembling with ecstasy and fear, for the patriarch was not simply a creature, he was the source of their bond, the anchor of their will. In his presence, doubt melted into devotion, thought itself bent to his command. It was said that to touch his clawed hand was to feel eternity, that his eyes held the promise of stars burning like holy lanterns in the void. Every hybrid felt his pull, a psychic chain that bound them tighter than blood, and through him the hive mind of the stars flickered faintly into being, a shadow of the great devourer yet to come. Few truly understood what they served, and fewer still cared. To the Brood, the patriarch was salvation made flesh, and they loved him with a depth of passion that outstripped any imperial catechism. From the magus came the voice, from the patriarch came the bond, and between them the cult grew into something more than hidden kin. It became an organism, alive and pulsing with shared purpose. Cells of the faithful formed in manufactoria, in hab blocks, in the guild houses of merchants and the ranks of the enforcers. Each worked in silence, outwardly loyal to the Imperium, inwardly consecrated to the Starborn. Their rituals grew bolder, their gatherings larger, chants echoed in the dark, rhythmic and hypnotic, a heartbeat beneath the hive's endless roar of machinery. Still, None outside the brood could sense the true scale of what was forming. To the average citizen, life continued as before. Shifts began, shifts ended, hunger gnawed and debts grew. But beneath that ordinary suffering, an entire alternate faith was blooming, more vibrant and seductive than anything sanctioned by terror. Every day the brood grew more confident, and every day the hive unknowingly slid further from the Emperor's light. The cult had found its prophets, its saints, and its God made flesh. What remained was time, and the patience to wait for the signal from beyond the stars. Until then, the brood would kneel, and whisper, and prepare. The hive was always hungry. Hungry for labor, hungry for obedience, hungry for silence in the face of injustice. For centuries it had swallowed its people whole, grinding them into fuel for the Imperium's endless war. Yet now, without a single shot fired, something new was filling its veins. The brood did not march openly, but its reach spread further each night, a tide that crept not with banners but with whispers. At first it was the desperate, the broken men and women who had nothing left to lose. An indentured miner who had watched his children waste away on rations thinner than paper. A manufactorum worker who had lost an arm to the machines and been cast aside without compensation. A hab widow whose husband had been press-ganged into the Astra Militorum and never returned. To them, the cult's promises were not abstract theology but salvation. The brood offered belonging, a family that could not be broken, a place where scars were not shame but proof of endurance. From the desperate it spread to the hopeful, to those who still had something left to protect. The magus spoke of a dawn when no child would starve, when no overseer's lash would draw blood in the name of imperial quotas. The patriarch's psychic presence filled their dreams, wrapping them in warmth so intoxicating that even the harshest waking hours felt worth enduring. They began to see the cult not as rebellion but as inevitability. It was no longer a question of if the Imperium's rule would fall but when. Soon the faithful numbered in the thousands, then tens of thousands. Rituals once hidden in forgotten maintenance tunnels spilled into entire sub-levels of the hive. The chants grew louder, the offerings stranger. Firelight flickered in abandoned manufactoria as sermons painted the walls with shadows, and icons not of the imperial Aquila, but of the four-armed emperor were carved into steel and bone alike. The brood's web reached into every tier of society. Enforcers swore loyalty in secret, feeding intelligence to their hidden kin. Administratum clerks falsified records, concealing movements of arms shipments and food supplies. Even the ecclesiarchy, guardians of the emperor's word, found itself infiltrated. Priests who once thundered against heresy now delivered homilies that seemed orthodox to the casual listener, but to the faithful were codes layered with promise. Every sermon was a signal, every benediction a vow, and yet for all their growing strength, the brood did not rise. Not yet. Their patience was their most terrifying weapon. To the outsider they appeared harmless, indistinguishable from loyal imperial citizens. No uprising, no blood spilled, no alarm to raise, only silence, only waiting, waiting for the skies to split and their gods to descend. The hive authorities sensed unrest, of course, they always did. A few rumors circulated of strange gatherings, of miners vanishing only to return with a glassy zeal in their eyes, of symbols carved where no work order permitted. But in a hive where unrest was perpetual, where every day saw riots over food shortages and labor strikes, such murmurs were background noise. By the time the truth began to dawn, the roots of the brood had sunk too deep. Every corridor, every hab, every guild house could conceal a hybrid, every citizen might be a convert. To the Imperium, the hive still appeared loyal, its tithe of ore and men delivered on schedule, but beneath that fragile mask of obedience, the brood had claimed the soul of the world, and so in silence, the infection ripened. Its veins pulsed with faith, its heart beat with the patriarch's will, and its lungs whispered promises in every darkened corner. The people of the hive had found their true family, and for the first time in generations they no longer felt abandoned. They were not alone, they were chosen. They were waiting for the stars to answer. It began not with thunder, but with a whisper. For years the brood had waited in shadows, their claws tucked neatly beneath the skin of their host society. They had built a web of loyalty that stretched from the lowest sump dwellers to officers wearing the emperor's sigil. They had prayed, they had prepared, and they had endured. But there comes a moment when even the deepest-rooted infection must break the surface, when the silence of waiting curdles into the scream of revelation. That moment came on a day like any other. The forges roared with promethium flames, Manufactoria spat out endless shells and plating for wars light years away, and the miners delved deeper into stone that had long ago ceased to feel like rock, and now resembled the cracked bones of the hive itself. The administratum's tithe collectors tallied their numbers with deadened eyes, and the Arbites patrolled streets that would never truly quiet. To the loyalists, it was another day of toil. To the brood, it was the hour of awakening. The Patriarch's psychic will surged through the web of its kin like fire through dry brush. Minds that had once carried a faint hum of his presence now felt a sudden, overwhelming blaze. It was not a command in words but a tide of certainty that washed away hesitation. They knew what must be done. They knew it was time. The first act of unveiling was small, almost imperceptible. A manufactorum worker, once bent and broken under the overseer's lash, turned as the siren mocked the end of shift. Instead of shuffling out as he had countless times before, he raised his voice in a chant, not of the emperor, but of the four-armed father. It was a sound alien to the sanctioned liturgies, yet resonant with a power that pulled others to join. Within moments, dozens of throats echoed him. The overseers shouted for silence, their shock giving way to fury. One drew a shock maul, and then the first blood was spilled, not by the enforcers but by the faithful. The worker's broken tool became a weapon. His fellow laborers surged forward, not as individuals but as one body, one will, guided by the Patriarch's mind. The overseers fell, their cries drowned by the roar of voices that no longer belonged to men, but to a congregation. And when the overseer's blood splashed onto the machinery, it was taken not as tragedy, but as sacrament. Across the hive, the same pattern repeated. A miner collapsed to his knees, chanting in ecstasy, and within moments his entire workgang erupted into violence. A Hab preacher tore open his ecclesiastical robes to reveal the four-armed symbol carved into his flesh, igniting riots in the streets. Enforcers thought loyal, turned their weapons on their comrades without hesitation. The spark had caught, and the hive became a furnace. The Arbites scrambled to restore order, vox grills barking commands across precinct fortresses. But their forces found themselves outnumbered, outflanked and betrayed from within. Every squad dispatched to crush a riot discovered its own members turning their shotguns on loyal brothers. Every corridor echoed with chants rising from throats raw with fervor, and every sealed bulkhead became another shrine, defaced with icons of the brood. To the loyal citizen, it was madness without reason. Neighbors who had shared food suddenly turned upon them with burning eyes and clawed hands. Entire Hab blocks vanished behind barricades overnight, their interiors alive with hymns to gods that were not the emperor. To the faithful, it was deliverance. The time of waiting was over. The stars themselves would tremble at their devotion. And above it all, unseen yet omnipresent, the Patriarch's laughter rippled through the warp, not sound but sensation. The hive had awoken. The riots were never meant to stay riots. They were rehearsals woven into the brood's plan with precision that only the Patriarch's will could enforce. What seemed at first like chaotic outbreaks of madness quickly revealed itself as coordinated strikes, timed across the hive like the beating of a single monstrous heart. At the mid-hive levels, Manufactoria erupted in fire as work gangs turned on their overseers with smuggled explosives. Vast foundries that had churned out shells for the Astra Militarum now became fortresses of rebellion, their great furnaces stoked not for production but for destruction. The air turned thick with promethium smoke, and the rhythmic pounding of heavy presses became the drumming of war. In the Hab spires above, the cult's infiltration of the clergy bore its most chilling fruit. Priests who had once preached the Emperor's light now unveiled themselves as magus and prophets of the four-armed father. Standing before their congregations, they shed the thin mask of imperial devotion and spoke with voices sharpened by psychic resonance. Their words were sermons of liberation, promises of a future where no lash would fall, no tithe would drain, no Arbite's boot would grind. The congregations erupted, the faithful throwing down imperial icons and lifting crude effigies of the brood in their place. What began as sermons ended as mass conversions, and what began as conversions ended as armed mobs surging into the streets. But it was in the underhive that the rebellion struck hardest. The Underhive had always been a graveyard of forgotten lives, a place where hunger and desperation bred hatred for the Imperium. The brood had nurtured that hatred, tended it like a flame. Now when the Patriarch's call came, entire gangs and syndicates declared for the cult. They emerged from tunnels and vents in their thousands, armed with stubbers, blades and jury-rigged weapons, their bodies marked with crude tattoos of the four-armed sigil. They surged upward, tier by tier, drowning Arbites patrols in numbers, overwhelming checkpoints in waves of fanatic flesh. The Arbites and the local Astra Militarum garrison fought with a grim resolve, barricading key choke points and calling for reinforcements from orbit. But reinforcements did not come. The Vox relays were jammed, their operators already enthralled by the brood. Astropathic choirs pressed into sending desperate pleas to the wider Imperium, found their messages choked by psychic interference. Some screamed and clawed at their eyes, claiming to see vast many-limbed shapes coiling beyond the veil. Whether this was mere psychic echo of the Patriarch or some distant shadow of the hive mind itself, no one could say. For the Loyalists, every hour became a battle for survival. Imperial banners were torn down from precinct walls and replaced with the sigil of the cult. Sacred shrines were defiled, aquili gouged out and replaced with images of the Father. Corpses hung from gantries as warnings, their flesh stripped and displayed like trophies. Yet not all loyal hearts faltered. Amid the tide of betrayal, there were those who refused to bend. Arbite squads barricaded precinct houses, their shotguns booming through endless waves of attackers. Guardsmen of the Astra Militarum held choke points until their ammunition ran dry, then fought on with bayonets and fists. Civilians too, horrified at the unveiling of neighbors they once trusted, armed themselves with knives and hunting rifles, clinging to their faith in the Emperor's light. But for every pocket of resistance 10 more fell. The hive had become a battlefield, its spires and shafts echoing with the clash of steel, the bark of lustfire, and the unholy chants of the faithful. From above the spires seemed to burn like candles, smoke spiraling into the heavens, while deep below the Underhive roared like a living beast finally unchained. And through it all, the Patriarch sat enthroned in shadow, unseen yet omnipresent, guiding his children toward their destiny. What had begun as whispers was now a scream that could not be ignored. The Imperium would notice, reinforcements would come, but by the time they arrived, the hive would already belong to the brood. The first days of rebellion were painted in fire and blood, but what came after was not mere chaos. The brood had never intended to burn the hive only to ash. The destruction was but a tool, the violence a mask for something more insidious, the reshaping of an entire world in their image. Once the imperial lines of authority shattered, the cult moved to replace them with its own structure, a mirror of the Imperium twisted into devotion to the four-armed father. Arbite's precincts that once echoed with the bark of orders now thundered with the chants of brood prayers. Where once officers plotted defense over data slates, now magus and lieutenants of the cult mapped out conquests on blood-stained parchments. Every captured voxcaster became a pulpit, broadcasting sermons that drowned the airwaves with the promise of salvation. Manufactoria that had stood silent in the aftermath of the riots were brought back to life, their machines no longer serving the tithe to terror, but repurposed to churn out weapons for the brood. Stub rifles, crude explosives, armored haulers, every line that once produced goods for the Imperium now became a forge for rebellion. Even servitors, stripped of imperial command codes, were reprogrammed by the cult's techno-sympathizers to serve their new masters, their once blank faces daubed with the four-armed sigil. The cult's hierarchy revealed itself in full for the first time. The Patriarch remained the unseen god, a looming psychic presence whispered of but never questioned. The magus acted as prophet, his voice the law, his psychic will shaping fear into fervor. Beneath him stood the primus, marshalling squads of pure strains and hybrids like a general of old, directing ambushes, consolidating victories, ensuring no pocket of resistance could regroup. Around them clustered the lieutenants of the brood, each commanding cells that spread like tendrils into every corner of the hive. For the common cultist, this was not tyranny. This was freedom. For the first time in generations they were fed, not from the scraps of their overseers, but from stores stolen from the Imperium itself. Water rationing ended as seized cisterns were distributed freely. The cult's healers tended the wounded without demanding tithes. Families torn apart by the Arbite's cruelty were reunited under the banner of the Father. To the oppressed, the rebellion felt like deliverance. To the faithful, it felt like prophecy fulfilled. And always, the whispers grew louder. The Magus spoke of a time soon to come when their true kin from the stars would arrive. He told them the Patriarch's brood was but the first seed, that far beyond the void, the great family waited. The rebellion was not merely a war against imperial chains, it was a preparation for ascension. The faithful clung to these words, believing that every act of bloodshed, every fire set, every banner raised brought them closer to a future without hunger, without pain, without the Imperium. But not all accepted this new order. Some fought on. Loyalists scattered and few carved out pockets of defiance in hab blocks and fortified guild halls. They became hunted prey, driven into the shadows where they plotted desperate strikes. Yet each act of resistance only fed the brood's narrative. The Magus called them remnants of a dying age, clinging to the corpse of an emperor who had abandoned them. And the people, already swayed by liberation and bound by the Patriarch's psychic touch, believed. The hive had been remade. What had begun as whispers had become a scream, and what had begun as chaos had become order, an order loyal not to the emperor, but to the brood. And above it all, unseen but felt by every mind entangled in the Patriarch's will, the shadow of something greater stirred, something vast, something hungry. At first, the silence felt like victory. The guns of the loyalists had gone quiet, their banners torn down, their leaders slain or driven into the depths of the underhive. In their place, the hymnals of the cult rose high, carried on every vox frequency, and painted across every crumbling wall. The hive breathed differently now. No longer was the air thick with the clipped bark of imperial decrees. Now it thrummed with chants of brotherhood, promises of unity, and the low, ever-present whisper of the Father's psychic will. But beneath that triumphant stillness, another silence grew. It was the silence of the void pressing in, a silence so deep it seemed to devour thought itself. The Magus felt it first. At times he would pause mid-sermon, his eyes clouding, his words faltering as if an unseen weight pressed against his mind. He would recover quickly, spinning his pause into prophecy, claiming the Father had spoken. Yet behind his assurances, behind the calm mask of his face, a shadow gnawed. The Patriarch stirred often now, its bulk shifting restlessly upon its throne of bones and stone. The brood interpreted these movements as signs of favor, but those who felt the psychic resonance more acutely understood that the Patriarch's restlessness was not mere indulgence. It was anticipation. Something beyond the horizon of the void had brushed against its mind. Something vast, incomprehensible, and terrible in its hunger. Rumors spread among the brood, carried on hushed voices between prayer and labor. Some claimed the Emperor had turned his gaze upon their world at last, seeking vengeance for their rebellion. Others whispered of angels of the void, kin greater than any purer strain, who were coming to gather them into eternal embrace. The Magus, ever the weaver of faith, spoke only of the great family beyond the stars, assuring them that their sacrifices, their bloodshed, their devotion had been seen. And yet, though his words roused cheers and redoubled fervor, his heart trembled. He could feel the truth in the edges of his mind, an approaching pressure, like the first tremors of a great wave that would one day drown all shores. It was not the Emperor's gaze. It was not salvation as the cult understood it. It was hunger, pure and endless, gazing upon their world as a beast gazes upon prey. Still, the brood prepared. Manufactoria ran day and night, forging crude weapons, plating captured haulers into war machines. Children were drilled alongside their parents, their voices raw from chanting hymns that bound them tighter and tighter into the Patriarch's web. No one questioned, no one hesitated. The psychic bond threaded through them, making each thought an echo of another, each heartbeat a drumbeat in the same rhythm. For the first time the hive was united. But unity under the shadow of the hive mind was not salvation. It was the stillness before consumption. The Magus stood before his flock one night, the banners of the Father swaying in the oily air, and raised his voice with a tremor that none mistook for fear but all felt deep in their marrow. He told them the stars were moving, that the sky itself was watching, and that soon their family would come. The brood erupted in rapture, their cheers rising like thunder through the hollowed ruins of the city. And as their voices echoed into the void answered, not in words, not in song but in hunger. The first signs were small, almost forgettable. yet no soul who bore witness ever truly forgot. A sudden distortion across the voxnet, where once clear voices dissolved into a static chorus of whispers that carried no words but filled the heart with unease. Power surges in the manufactoria that fried circuits without reason, leaving half-finished weapons smoldering in the forges. A shift in the taste of the air itself, coppery, electric, like the breath of a storm that had not yet broken. The brood took these signs as blessings, omens of the great family's imminent arrival. Mothers painted their children's faces with oil and ash, marking them with crude renditions of the patriarch's visage. The magus proclaimed that the veil between their hive and the stars was thinning, and that soon their kin would descend to gather them into eternal unity. His sermons grew more fevered, his gestures sharper, his voice cracking with the strain of channeling what he called prophecy, but what gnawed at him in sleepless silence as something far greater, far colder. The patriarch's lair had grown unbearable to approach. Once the faithful had entered in waves to bask in its presence, to crawl before its claws and feel its mind pierce theirs with love sharper than pain. Now even the boldest of pure strains hesitated before stepping too close. The beast shifted constantly, flexing its limbs, its talons raking furrows into the stone. Its mind radiated a pressure so immense that weaker hybrids collapsed outright, blood running from their ears, their bodies convulsing as if their veins themselves were being rewritten. The magus alone could approach with impunity, though even he staggered beneath its weight, each audience leaving him thinner, paler, his eyes sinking into shadows, and above in the endless gulf of the void, something stirred. Ships still came and went from the system, though fewer each week. Traders complained of malfunctioning warp engines, of astropaths whose voices failed mid-chant, of navigators writhing in agony at unseen shapes that brushed their minds. A whisper spread through the surviving imperial loyalists, broken and scattered, that the Astronomicon itself was dimming in their quadrant of the galaxy, that perhaps the Emperor's light no longer reached them. The cult of course rejoiced, for to them this dimming was proof that their family's promise was true. But faith is not blind forever. A few began to sense the undertone of dread that pulsed within the patriarch's restless form. They felt the chill beneath the magus's fiery words. A mother kissed her child goodnight, and dreamed of skies tearing open with wings not of angels but of knives. A soldier of the brood, once proud of his new form, found himself staring into broken glass at the jagged curve of his carapace, and wondering if it was beauty or doom he wore. The magus quelled doubt with fire and scripture, his voice rising like a whip, lashing away hesitation, yet he too lay awake at night, staring into the blackness above his chamber, hearing not prayers in his skull but a distant roaring tide. It was not speech, it was not thought, it was hunger, vast and eternal, pressing against the edges of his mind until tears leaked from his eyes and his teeth cracked beneath the strain. The brood did not know the word for what approached, though somewhere hidden among scraps of ancient data slates and crumbling tomes, the name was etched in half-burned records, Terranid. But to the cult it was still the great family, their long-awaited kin, their salvation. And when the sky finally broke, they would discover what salvation meant. It began with a sound no ear could truly hear, not thunder, not song, not even the chittering whispers the brood had once mistaken for guidance. It was the collapse of silence itself, the pressure of something vast and infinite pressing into the skin of reality. The first to feel it were the psychers, those sanctioned wretches shackled in imperial cells, their minds already half broken by years of servitude. Their screams erupted in unison across the hab blocks, a shrieking chorus that boiled blood and rattled steel. Vox recordings later revealed nothing but static, though those who listened swore they could make out the faint echo of many voices speaking as one. The patriarch roared that night, a sound that tore through the catacombs like an earthquake. The hybrids fell to their knees, clutching their heads, eyes flooding with crimson tears. The magus staggered forward, arms wide, proclaiming that the hour had come, yet his voice broke mid-sentence, guttural and raw, as if words themselves could not bear the weight of what pressed upon him. The pure strains thrashed like beasts in cages, clawing at the walls until their talons sparked stone to flame. Above ground the world warped. The skies darkened with a pall that no storm could explain, yet no rain fell. Animals bolted from the forests, their bodies foaming, their eyes rupturing. Rivers thickened, sluggish and black, as though poisoned by nothing more than the gaze of the void. Even the manufactoria, once deafening with the rhythm of labor, fell silent as their engines stalled, machine spirits withdrawing in terror at something too immense to comprehend. And still the shadow grew. The faithful had no words for it, no scripture prepared for a revelation so total. They gathered in the open squares, arms raised to the heavens, chanting hymns of welcome, of kinship, of eternal reunion. Yet even among their exultation, unease slithered. Some felt not joy but dread in the marrow of their bones. A worker who had once offered his firstborn to the patriarch collapsed mid-prayer, whispering through cracked lips that he could see eyes staring down from the void, endless, pitiless, vast as galaxies. The magus fought to contain the panic. His words boomed over the cult, thunderous and divine, insisting this was proof of their destiny. He declared that soon the skies would open, and their true brethren would descend, carrying them into eternity. But each sermon left his voice more ragged, each proclamation dripping with desperation he could not quite mask. In the solitude of his chamber, he clawed his own skin raw, trying to drown out the tide of thoughts that were not thoughts, the tide of hunger that whispered in every moment of quiet. The patriarch writhed endlessly now, unable to rest, its massive claws shredding the very stone of its sanctum, its mind pressed into every corner of the hive, a beacon both exalting and suffocating. For in the presence of the hive mind's advance, even this monstrous idol seemed like a flickering candle before a devouring storm. The brood could feel it too, though most dared not admit it. The patriarch was no longer the pinnacle of their worship. It was but a herald, a fragment, a tiny reflection of the sea that was coming. And when the first spore shadows appeared streaking across the sky, no larger than sparks, yet unmistakable in their descent, many fell to the ground in rapture, believing salvation had finally arrived. Others wept, not in joy, but in terror, for they had seen in their dreams what followed. They came as fire across the heavens, not sleek craft forged in imperial shipyards, not vessels marked by the aquila or the sigils of rogue traders, but living meteors, vast and organic, trailing smoke and screaming atmosphere as they plunged toward the world. To the common eye they might have seemed like falling stars, but the brood knew at once what they were: spore ships. The first droplets of a cosmic storm. The cult filled the streets, their chants rising until they became indistinguishable from howls. Mothers lifted infants skyward, their tiny malformed limbs twitching with instinctive recognition. The pure strains prowled openly through avenues where once they had skulked in shadow, their talons gleaming wet in the pale light. The magus declared that the prophecy had unfolded, that the final veil was being lifted. His words boomed, almost triumphant. Yet beneath his sermon the ground itself shook. When the first of the spores struck, the impact cracked mountains, forests incinerated in an instant. Promethium tanks burst in manufactoria districts miles away from the site of descent. From the crater rose not fire but flesh. The walls of the pods split, oozing ichor and steam, and the things inside began to stir. They were creatures not unlike the pure strains, but greater, vaster, clad in carapace harder than plasteel, their limbs ending in scything blades. Their shrieks carved the air itself, a sound like hunger made audible. The cult rushed toward them, arms open, voices cracking with ecstasy. To be near them was to breathe purpose, to feel the coil of destiny wrap tight around the soul, but purpose was not mercy. The first to approach were shredded instantly, their blood hissing as it struck alien armor. Yet the survivors cheered louder, convinced that sacrifice was the highest welcome. More surged forward, even as the streets filled with the red mist of their brethren. The magus stood at the edge of the crater, robes flaring in the ash wind. His body shook, but he did not retreat. He lifted his arms to the Terranid warriors, shouting that they were the chosen heralds of the hive mind, the children of the void who had come to deliver kinship eternal. The patriarch, dragged forth by its attendants, bellowed so loudly that buildings cracked, its mind flooding across the city in waves of worship. But the hive Terranid creatures did not kneel, they did not even pause. They scythed forward, devouring, tearing, rending the faithful who prostrated themselves before them. Each corpse was not discarded but consumed, pulled apart in a frenzy of claws and teeth. The faithful died smiling, believing their souls ascended into the hive. Perhaps they were right, perhaps not. What mattered was that nothing was left of them but steaming bones, ground into slurry, and dragged back into the abyssal maw of the swarm. The spore ships kept falling, one after another, hammering the land, bursting open with new horrors. Capillary towers began to sprout from the impact sites, vast biological spires pulsing with ichor, thrusting toward the stars. The planet's crust split beneath their spread, veins of alien matter pushing into the soil. In a single night, the world was rewritten, and through it all, the cult howled in devotion. To the Imperium, they would appear as heretics consumed by monsters. To themselves they were ascending, swallowed into the body of their god. What was annihilation to one, was apotheosis to another. Yet even in the ecstasy, even in the blood-drenched rapture, a single truth whispered beneath the shadow of wing. The sky had ceased to be a sky. It was now a writhing ocean of chitin and wings, a storm of tendrils that blotted out the sun and replaced daylight with a pulsing organic twilight. Every horizon crawled with alien silhouettes, every valley churned with a biomass tide that rose higher by the hour. The planet itself, once familiar and solid beneath the cult's feet, now felt like it was dissolving into something else, reshaped by forces older and colder than any human soul could bear to comprehend. And yet, within the ruin, the cult still sang. Their chants were no longer words but ululations, guttural cries that sounded less like human worship and more like echoes of the hive itself. Each voice blended into the other until individuality was obliterated, a single chorus rising into the storm. Perhaps this was their triumph, to lose themselves so fully that they became indistinguishable from the thing they adored. The magus, half broken from exhaustion, bled from his eyes as he preached the final sermon. He told his flock that their transformation was complete, that they would live forever in the hive mind, never again to know isolation or despair. He told them that death was not an end but a merging, the truest communion. His staff trembled in his hands, his body flickered with psychic strain, but still he held himself upright. The patriarch no longer spoke with subtlety. Its mind filled every thought in the city like a flood, overriding fear, drowning hesitation. To hear it was to kneel without choice, to open one's throat to the sky and scream devotion until the lungs burst. Every cultist was bound to it, not through chains of iron but through something far stronger, the certainty that they were chosen. And then the hive descended in full. Carnifexes thundered through the ruins, each step collapsing streets into rubble. Gaunts swarmed across walls and ceilings like living tides of teeth, their bodies blotting out whole battalions of Astra Militarum before the defenders even raised their rifles. The Imperial Guard fired until their barrels glowed red, until their voices cracked from screaming orders through vox grills, but it was like spitting into a hurricane. Tanks were overturned and stripped to skeletons in moments. Bastions became feasting grounds. Resistance was no more than seasoning to the swarm. Still the cult sang. They welcomed their end with open arms even as they were torn limb from limb. They believed they were feeding their god, that their flesh would be transmuted into something eternal. Perhaps they were right. For in that moment of dismemberment, as their blood soaked into alien soil and their bones were swallowed into biopools, something of them did live on. Their molecules were consumed, their consciousness drowned, their essence recycled. They ceased to be human. They ceased to be cultists. They became tyrannid. Yet within the mindless perfection of the hive, there was no... The world was gone. Nothing of it remained but a broken crust drifting beneath a sky that was no longer a sky, but the maw of something larger. The oceans boiled into clouds of nutrient mist, pulled upward into the digestion pools of the hive fleet. Mountains sank into themselves, their stone marrow liquefied and sucked into colossal capillaries of alien flesh. Cities, history, archives, shrines, everything vanished into the slurry. The biosphere was erased in days, its memories stripped and stored only in the raw code of biomass. And then silence. For the hive leaves nothing behind, no monument, no record, no trace of the billions that once breathed there. Not even the dust of bones remains. Only the orbiting void, scarred with spore clouds and drifting debris, holds witness. The cultists' chants, the magus's sermons, the patriarch's roars, all were now no more than faint ripples dissolved into the immensity of the hive mind, indistinguishable from a trillion others across a million devoured worlds. To the hive, this was not victory. Victory implies choice, intention, reflection. The hive does not reflect. It only moves forward, endlessly consuming, endlessly reshaping. The fall of a world is not a conquest. It is simply another feeding, the same as the millions before, the same as the millions to come. And yet, to those who remain human, there lingers a question: what does it mean that the Genestealer's touch feels like love? Why is it that the first infection carries with it a sense of purpose, of belonging, of salvation? Why is the parasite dressed in the robes of divinity? Why does its embrace feel like warmth before it devours? The truth may be simpler and crueler than any liturgy. It is camouflage, a biological trick as refined as the chameleonic hide of a lictor or the pheromone trails of a gaunt. Faith itself becomes the weapon, worship the anesthetic. The infection is not meant to be resisted, because resistance would delay the feast. It is meant to be desired. To hunger for infection is to quicken the world's demise. To call it holy is to dig your own grave with a song on your lips. Across the galaxy, the cycle repeats. On a mining world in the farthest rim, a laborer feels a brush against his skin in the shadows of a collapsed tunnel. On a shrine world, a pilgrim mistakes the whisper in his mind for the voice of a saint. On a hive world, an underhive ganger hears a promise of strength and welcomes the touch of something unseen in the dark. And in each place the infection takes root. Families warp, generations bend, armies rise in secret, until one day the sky darkens, and the cycle concludes as it always must. The galaxy is wide, but it is finite. Every star, every world, every bastion of humanity and Xenos alike, every one of them shines like a candle in the dark. And above them, beyond them, between them, there is the swarm, an ocean of endless hunger, patient and tireless, stretching from one end of the void to the other. It is not a question of if the hive will arrive, it is a question of when. And so the Genestealer's infection is more than just a curse for an individual or a cult. It is a prophecy, a ticking clock. Once the kiss is given, the end is already written. Whether in years, decades, or centuries, the hive will come, and when it comes there is no bargaining, no reasoning, no escape, there is only consumption. Perhaps that is the most terrifying revelation of all, that infection is not a blessing, nor even a punishment, it is simply inevitability. To be infected is to be erased. To live long enough to know you are infected is to hear the footsteps of the devourer approaching, slow and patient, until they are all you can hear. And then the silence falls again. The cycle had ended, and yet it had not. The world was gone. Yes, but the infection was never truly gone. Somewhere in the blackness, in the underbelly of a drifting space hulk, a single spore clung to a vent. Somewhere aboard a trade ship, a pilgrim stirred in his sleep and whispered in tongues that were not his own. Somewhere in the heart of a forgotten asteroid, a patriarch stirred from centuries of stillness, its claws twitching with hunger. The galaxy is vast, but the threads of infection are infinite, woven through its every shadow. This is why the Imperium fears them so, not merely because they kill, but because they corrupt. Because they turn faith into fuel, family into weapon, and loyalty into the rope by which a world is strangled. The Astra Militarum can bombard a cult into ash. The adeptus astartes can carve down a patriarch with bolter and blade. But even then, even in the most decisive purges, can anyone truly be certain? Can anyone swear that not one spore escaped, not one touch was exchanged in the confusion, not one soul carried a fragment of that curse into the wider night? Perhaps there is no end to it. Perhaps this is what eternity looks like in the grim darkness of the far future. Not glorious war, not triumphant crusade, but an endless unraveling of lives, each thread quietly tugged by claws that remain unseen until it is far too late. Perhaps the truest horror of infection is not the moment of transformation, nor even the sight of a world falling to its knees in worship of the hive. Perhaps it is the knowledge that every triumph humanity claims, every fortress it builds, every bastion it raises against the dark within them all, the seed may already be growing. And so we return to the image that began it all, a whisper in the dark, a caress that feels like love. The curse of the Genestealer is not that it kills you, the curse is that it convinces you to welcome it, that when you die it is not with defiance, but with open arms, that even in the instant before your end, you might still believe you are saved. The galaxy will continue to burn, wars will rage, heroes will rise and fall, empires will collapse, but beneath it all, the infection spreads, always spreading, always waiting, always hungry, and when the hive finally consumes the last star, there will be no witnesses left to mourn it, only silence, only hunger, only the endless shadow of the swarm, and perhaps if the stars themselves remember, they will recall us not as warriors, or martyrs, or dreamers, but only as the fleeting warmth of a meal, swallowed and forgotten in the cold eternity of the void.